Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining my Hashi Talks 2023 talk. I'm excited to be here and talk to you a little bit about incident management today. So let's switch to the slides. So this talk, I titled it When You're in Command of the Incident. And hopefully I'm going to explain a little bit about incident management to you, the history of an incident command system, and then maybe give you some suggestions for ways that you can get into that or just improve the culture around incident management in general at your organization. Just to get into it, I'm Martin Smith. I'm a staff site reliability engineer at HashiCorp. My pronouns are he, him. You can see my Twitter there. I also put the HashiCorp Cloud Platform logo there because that's what I end up working on a lot in my time at HashiCorp. Before that, I've also been a principal engineer. I've been a Linux administrator. I've been a DBA. I've been a software developer. Lots of things where I've had to deal with incidents in shipping software. And I've given a lot of technical talks as well as ones on building your SRE practice and more process-oriented talks. But this one is really about how to build a culture of incident management, specifically focused on the incident command role. So come with me on this journey. What is incident command? It actually originated, ICS or Incident Command System, originated with the fire service in the 70s out west, as there were lots of fires where folks were trying to coordinate multi-agency responses, communications, and really resolve problems. And before that, every type of emergency really had its own incident process or plan. And this is intended to sort of unify all those, work in any situation, make it really clear the chain of command, and respond to all kinds of emergencies consistently and effectively, and resolve them, right? So again, started in the 70s. And I included this classic incident command system diagram, which kind of talks about the different roles. You'll actually see that there's roles in certain areas like the fire service where there's actually 36 different positions. But a lot of them, whether it's FEMA or the fire service or a hospital or even us over in tech, these are the common ones that show up. And essentially, before this, studied in the 60s and 70s, it was determined that a lot of the responses that we were seeing to emergencies were really failures of communication or management or decision making, rather than a failure to respond because of resources or understanding or knowledge. So we just needed a way to consistently make decisions, have a systematic response, systematic communications. Before this, you also saw a lot of like freelancing or just folks kind of popping around incidents, trying to figure out where they could contribute. So if you work in IT and you've seen that, that's exactly what was being studied in the 60s or 70s. And this is what came out of that. So what is the incident command system intended to address? Really, it's temporary situations that are unplanned. And you'll also sometimes see the word event if you go read any of the literature about classic incident command. And that means that they're talking about like a concert or maybe some big gathering, a parade, a training exercise. So really, this is intended to deal with those events as well as totally unplanned incidents. When thinking about tech, I would ask, how many of you have been in a DR exercise or a disaster recovery plan where you've worked on the plan, but you've never actually stepped through it? This is all that stuff that even if you have a plan, even if you have backups, being able to execute on that well and run an incident through that requires good incident command. So if you haven't actually practiced everything from the paging to the pulling in other teams to the verification afterwards, you might benefit from incident command because not only is it important to have backups or be able to do restore, but how your organization actually executes that is equally a component of its success. So Just a little bit of a look here into what happens during general incident command. Uh, I've listed sort of the plan you need to have, which includes like, what are we doing? Who's responsible for doing it? What are we going to communicate? How do we deal with things that pop up? Incident command is really in charge of figuring out what that plan is and coordinating that response, right? So the incident command is responsible for every decision that's made in an incident. Now, it could be as simple as rolling back a change, rolling back a pull request, and the plan is pretty clear. It's like rolling back, who's doing it, the developer that shipped it, et cetera, et cetera. But it might be more complicated, right? It might be that there's some sort of systemic issue in a queuing system, and not only are you rolling back a technical thing or tuning some parameters, but you might also have to communicate with your customers, or you might have to muster a larger response, page more people, or even coordinate more teams who are all investigating their own parts of the problem. So incident command is really all of those things, as well as figuring out what the plan is for each work stream or swim lane or team that's doing something during an incident. So I've also listed here at the bottom sort of this classic, you see this diagram all over the place that is the incident sort of process, which is observe, make a decision, do something, observe, and adjust as you go. And so I like the one that is OODA. I like a lot of the diagrams out there. You'll see if you search on Google Images, you'll find a lot of diagrams about that incident process. But I also included the PagerDuty ones that they ship, which are size up, stabilize, update, verify. So essentially, you're going to be driving the incident towards resolution, and you're going to know the priorities of the organization. You're going to delegate, and you're going to really not micromanage. It's sort of a core tenet that the incident commander does not actually get involved in the incident itself in terms of investigating, resolving an issue, looking at logs, looking at metrics. Any kind of incident remediation action should not be the incident commander. You're the one coordinating that all of this actually gets done. So yeah, with that, that's what an incident commander does essentially, is work on those plans and resolve an issue, whether there's multiple work streams with multiple plans or a very simple change. But you have a lot of control over the situation as an incident commander, right? You can ensure your colleagues are not working 24 hours and getting some sleep. You can ensure your customers are getting the communications you always wanted. You can ensure your company is acting humanely, caring that it's taking care of both your colleagues as well as your customers. Really, there's a lot of power in being an incident commander. A lot of places say that the incident commander is the most powerful person in the room during an incident, even beyond a CEO or a VP or someone's direct manager. So that's great. That incident command gives you this ability to have this really direct and profound effect on your company and the software you ship and the product. But it's also really a very grueling job. It can leave you full of self-doubt. You might make wrong decisions. You might have to talk to people you consider that are your friends and tell them to, step into another room, or to, give them an order, or that sort of thing. It's really difficult. You might even question whether you have a solution to a problem and whether you should have had another solution ready to go next, right? Maybe the team you're working with has got it all figured out, and you realize they didn't, or there was a problem, and maybe you should have asked another group of people to go investigate a second thing. So you're constantly second guessing yourself. You also have the potential to make a wrong step and really make your company or your product look bad. It's also super difficult to give feedback or improve or practice. Or even to give feedback is really difficult, right? Do you want people to send you messages in the moment when you're in the middle of an incident as the commander? Or do you want to find out after? Do you want to be kind of steered by feedback as you're going? Very hard. And you can really exhaust yourself being incident commander is really a role where you're constantly reevaluating and reassessing and reasserting that you're the one making decisions. So it's the kind of thing you can't do very long, even if you're on call for a week or 3 days. Incident command is really a role that you're probably not going to do more than 8 or 12 hours at most. It's filled with self-doubt, as I've mentioned before. So, what are some things we can do to improve that situation? Um, we want to make the incident more effective and you as an incident commander more effective, but we also want to make it easy to perform that role. So here's some ideas, right? Really, from the first moment that you're becoming an incident commander or responding to an incident, there's a lot you can do to make the situation better for yourself. If you're a first responder, and I really like that term because it doesn't force you to think of yourself as an incident commander right away, but you're the first person responding to a fire or an issue or maybe a monitor or something like that. This is often where people freeze. It's actually been studied even in traditional incident command in the literature that a firefighter first shows up on scene and might freeze if there's not an easy system for incident command. So you should consider yourself the incident commander until you can hand it off. But I think just moving over to the middle of the right column here, you might consider that you should page someone in to be incident commander so you can be the investigator. Often we're on call for our own code. That's the DevOps way, but it does mean that sometimes you're on call to fix it, but you're not necessarily going to be able to fix it and also issue customer communications at the same time. So figuring out and letting those roles settle is really critical when you're first responding to an incident, even for an experienced incident commander. And also, I might even offer, if you're an experienced incident commander, you might show up and you might say, I can be an incident commander for your incident. Do you need an incident commander? Would you like to just investigate this issue and have the rest of it go away, right? So you might show up and do that for your colleagues. Maybe you even need other people to help you. But just figuring out who's going to be the investigator and who's going to be incident commander is huge when you're first starting an incident. And then you could also get more help after that if you need to. Also, the shadowing point here, following along with an experienced incident commander, this is much easier to talk about than to actually do. It's very difficult to take notes as a shadow the entire time you're going through an incident. And going back to the incident commander who maybe made 40 decisions in an incident, and then afterwards you're going to be the shadow and debrief with them and say, like, all right, what were you thinking in this exact moment? It's very hard to reconstruct that if you're the incident commander. It's good to record your incidents for that reason if you're on Zoom or something like that. But another thing about making incident command easier is actually scheduling, training more incident commanders. So not just about shadowing, but are you shadowable? If you're good at incident command, have you been able to be shadowed? Like, do you talk out loud about what things you're thinking about and going through? Do you take input from the rest of the incident? That all makes your job easier. So when you're first pulled into a new situation, think about your role, think about who else you can involve, think about how you can either be a good shadow, be shadowable, or make sure that when you're shadowing, you really capture everything that you're thinking and compare notes with who's actually incident command. That makes a huge difference. Speaking of talking more out loud, I'd like to jump in here to talk about people that might be more seasoned with incident command and give you some advice. One thing you can do is just practice. So whether you're driving in the car or sitting at home, try, if you have somebody nearby, explaining, like, what am I doing right now? What am I thinking? I love to do this exercise driving in a car where the incident commander is going to read the GPS and tell someone where to go. And you really work up a sort of rapport with the person you're working with, whether they're driving a car or solving an incident, where you start to have a mutual understanding. You start to have mutual terminology, right? You say, oh, it's another one of those right turns, or, oh, this is another warning about the same database restart, or whatever it is. So try talking through something with another person who has to actually drive, whether it's literally drive or figuratively drive. And practice in general is huge. Just learning how to talk to somebody else and have this shared vocabulary, right, is huge, so that you communicate clearly and effectively. Like, did you hear what I said? Are you doing the thing? Do you want to know the next thing? You tell me when you want to know the next thing. When do you want to know the next two things? Like, just that very precision in language when you're communicating with another person, and that rhythm is huge, and you should practice it. Also, I've mentioned a game here for practice, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, which is a bomb defusal game. And it's actually super fun to practice with a team because it requires one person actually look at some puzzles. And I'll show you what those look like here. There we go. That's one of the bombs in that game with a bunch of different puzzles on it, kind of an Among Us-like set of puzzles if you played that game. But you're doing that, and then a bunch of other people have resources so they can look up what's going on, look up the puzzles, they can take notes, they can build tools. And it's amazing how many times I love playing this with my team because we come up with all kinds of new systems. We come up with ways of talking about certain things in an incident. We come up with specializations. Who knows a particular puzzle more than another person? And that's exactly what happens during a real incident. Is you are trying to build up this familiarity, clarity of communication, and like single decision maker chain of command to solve a problem. So check out that game if you haven't seen it before, because it's actually really, really nice to give yourself sort of a fictitious incident to practice. Also, I think I've crossed off here too. There's always a bigger incident, right? There's always some incident that's going to challenge how you work or how you do things. So it's always good to do that practice. It's also really good to know your tech stack. Some of the things where I've been an incident commander for them, I've been really effective because I know what teams are involved, who's worked on what. Even just understanding the implications of an outage is huge. That makes you a better incident commander. You're able to actually guide a person writing customer communications better, able to figure out what team to reach out to, even just to understand whether something is high or low severity is super valuable. If you know your tech stack, you can really leverage that. And finally, working on being a better incident commander is feedback. Now, that's feedback in the moment. That's feedback while you're talking out loud and someone says, should we check this? Figuring out how to take that suggestion into account, not discount the person, but also work it into all the other things that the incident needs to accomplish. That takes practice too. Also, you should invite your colleagues, especially on your own team. Please tell me as we go along, like even if it's in DMs, even if you're just getting coached, like take all of that input. That's all better than one person on their own deciding things. You might also tell your colleagues you'd rather hear about something in a retro and not during the incident. That's totally fine too. But just make sure you're coachable and that you've given people an opportunity to give feedback. And really, I think during an incident, if people out loud can ask additional questions and you can triage them as incident command and decide what priority they are to answer, it makes you a much stronger incident commander. So yeah, here's that. Keep talking and nobody explodes. As I said, like my team has evolved all kinds of things like breaking into roles, ways to keep notes, what order of operations the team prefers when solving multiple problems at once, self-organizing. This is kind of like an escape room. If your team has ever done an escape room together, I think that's another thing you could really try that would be great. Also, I want to talk about other kinds of simulated practice. So there's game days, which are great. There are game days in which you actually act out every single problem and you actually break systems. There are things you might call a game day that I would call a tabletop exercise, which are more hypothetical. Who would you call? You ask like, what if this happened? What if that happened? Just don't lose focus if you're practicing those things aloud, that the goal is incident command. It's not necessarily for the other things folks might want. And it's really good to be clear going into those exercises what the goal is, right? Is the goal for your team to learn something technical about the system, or is the goal for you to learn how to be a better incident commander? So I would say be really clear about the goal. Try some of these different things, whether it's keep talking and no one explodes, or even just a tabletop hypothetical exercise with the system owner. Two other things, action items. Action items feel like there's something that happens after an incident, but if you can record action items during an incident, they will make a situation much better. They're all the things that you want to do for next time, so that next time you're incident commander, you're not in the same set of problems. You're solving new problems. So be really practiced about writing down action items in a way that can be triaged later. Practice this even outside of incidents. If you've got maybe you've got a sprint and a bunch of tickets you're going to work on, just practice summarizing that as a couple of sentences. And if you can do that, then you can come out of an incident with really good action items that you can further triage. That'll make you more effective. Also, I think as an incident commander, you have to be willing to share what's going on in your own mind, right? So this last one, feedback. I can't tell you how many times in a retrospective for a team or an incident I've said, I focused on this area. Was that right? I wasn't sure whether to page this team. Did it make sense to page that other team? Should I have talked to the VP? Should I have let the director that wanted to investigate this other area investigate, or should I have told them to stop, right? Like, if you share what you're thinking, you can actually then work with your team to come up with more defined processes for these things, because you really can't ever blame people for these decisions in the moment. It's part of a blameless culture that if there's not a process around something, it's really just people doing their best, and you need to respect that. So ask those questions in a retro. Should I have done this? Should I have done that? Should we have a run book for this? Those are the times where you really contribute as an incident commander to the next time there's a similar incident. What else? So I've also got some patterns of things you might have run into as an incident commander with some suggestions for how to work through them. One common one that I still see from time to time, even in the healthiest teams, is no one responds to a page. It's important to look at why. Is it just logistics? Are people burnt out because there's been too many pages? Is it because this incident's going on, or it's back again and it's a repeat? Are they doing sprint work, which is great too, but are they too busy that there's not enough capacity to respond to an incident? Some things you can do is you can have a manager rotation, really well-groomed escalation paths when someone doesn't respond. Maybe you have a secondary layer for on-call, or you even just have it page the entire team when a person doesn't respond. But often this is a sign of something bigger, and you should go talk to an engineering manager or a team in sprint planning and talk about changing the sprint work to actually address these issues. If people are so aware of what's happening that they're not willing to respond, it might be even time to stop declaring incidents. Remember, an incident is something unexpected. If a database or an app server or whatever is burning down constantly, it might be time to say that's no longer an incident. That's just the level of service. That's a really hard lesson for folks. Another one, you might get a director, a VP, or a CIO, or a CEO, or whoever coming into an incident and asking for you to do something, change the course of investigation, maybe even implement a different fix that could take months. You never know what they're going to suggest or offer. So this one's really hard. So I think you definitely want more senior folks as much as possible to respond to this person. People who have a good relationship with this person really help here. You could set expectations. There's actually some incident process advice that says every time you join the room, you should say, I'm the incident commander and I make decisions, just to set that going in. You might also have to just tell the person, here's the priority and the commitments, and what you're asking about isn't a priority. You could also pull them in. They could also be an incident responder for you. That's a great one because it channels a lot of enthusiasm and urgency into solving a problem. Worst case scenario, you might have to ask them to leave. It doesn't mean you have to kick them out of the incident. It might mean that you say, hey, can I have a work stream that goes and figures out a more medium or long-term solution for this? Can you take a Slack channel and do that? Can you hop on a Google Doc and do that? whatever that enthusiasm is, you should figure out a way to channel it if you can. But I think it's worth repeating. The incident commander should probably be the most powerful person in the company during the incident. And that can be an uncomfortable position to be in. Leverage your peers for this. Leverage your manager. Typically, even if your manager is below the person making suggestions, your manager is comfortable steering them elsewhere. Another one, too many threads, or maybe you don't have a lot of work and you want more threads to sort of hedge your bets on other problems. A lot of incident management tooling is really great about this. It helps you make swim lanes with extra Zoom channels or Zoom chats and extra Slack channels and take notes. It's really important when you split people out or groups of people out into different work streams that you give them a specific goal and a deadline. Or maybe they're exploring a theory, but you want to say, come back in 30 minutes. I'd like to know your update on whether this is worth working on, or whether we should change the backup schedule, or whether we should reboot the server, or whatever it is. Get a really clear goal for each of these groups when you create multiple swim lanes. And also, use that. If you think an incident is really simple, maybe ask a second group of 1 or 2 people to figure out what the next step is. What if this isn't the usual bug we've seen with the load balancer? What would we do next? And then have those people come back with a plan. That plan's actually valuable outside the incident. But the important thing here is to really leverage the fact that you as incident commander can multiplex all of these different investigations and research. And you can even get delegates to help you do that. One problem is when there's too many things going on, there might be a lot of Zoom audio chat or Slack channel chat or whatever. There might be just too much noise, and you might have to ask folks to clear the communications or even send them over to their own video conference or phone conference or Slack channel or whatever it is. You might have to make it something asynchronous and not interrupting you as incident commander trying to coordinate the overall response. So leverage those. Those actually, they feel really powerful when you do them, even though it seems really straightforward. It feels really powerful as an incident commander when you have 4 teams each solving a problem. What else? This is one of the later ones here. People get really tired of incidents as an incident commander. Your on-call shift might not match how long you've actually been an incident commander. It's important to ask yourself regularly, what are the halting conditions? When would we stop this incident? That is a real gift to you as an incident commander, is when would we stop? What is the ending criteria? You can also just press pause. You can say we're going to pause for 2 hours. You can say we're going to reconvene in 3 hours and look at whether this process to clean up finished or whatever that is. Also keep in mind, if you're stretched really thin on this staffing, it does mean you're not going to be able to handle a second incident. So it's really important that as a team or as an organization, you have enough that you could run 2 incidents concurrently. So even if that's just the last on-call person or another team's on-call person, be prepared for that eventuality. Also be prepared to resume again if you press pause. It's really important to have a contingency plan for if we see something else blow up, we're getting back on this incident Zoom, it's the same one. And then last but not least, sometimes there's too much process, right? Sometimes your incident management process is creating a doc, creating a channel, calling 3 people, paging the VP, all these things. Invest in automation, prefab as much, whether it's communications or documentation, write as much of that as possible. And if there's a lot of manual labor, you might need to create additional roles. So do that. But the incident management platforms out there can help a ton. Even ones that seem so simple, that automation goes such a long way to not having to do the toil of creating notes docs, creating timelines, all of that stuff. So those are some tips. I know that went fast. Why is this relevant? Back in the ICS, the Incident Command System world, this even gets brought up in court cases with government agencies. something to keep in mind, right? Like some government agency may or may not be considered at fault if they did or didn't follow an incident command process. This is your best way. You have humans running incident command. So this is your best way to be systematic about solving the problems. You can't blame humans without a system that they can work with. And you need a true blameless culture, or folks aren't going to volunteer. No one will want to be an incident commander. Also consider incident commanders in multiple areas. Maybe you need 2 or 3. Also look back at how the government has handled things with incident command systems. It's important to keep in mind that even as much as we've had this great system, there's still a lot of emergencies that get messed up, whether it's FEMA or whatever else. Like, no, these are not perfect. These are the best we've got, but you're always going to be iterating and improving. And finally, I just wanted to mention there's the NIST incident response framework as well as a SANS incident response framework. They're both kind of focused on security incidents, but if you're looking for sort of a step-by-step that's not just the federal government, check out some of those frameworks. Even though they're more oriented towards security and attacks and mitigation and all that sort of thing, they still can be really useful. But as long as you iterate and do the retrospectives that I've mentioned before, you'll continue to improve your incident command process, and hopefully you get a lot of easy incidents and you get a lot of opportunities to improve your own incident command experience. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I hope the rest of your Hashi Talks goes well. Thanks again.